Hello and welcome to another webinar in our International Type Approvals and Market Access webinar series. My name is Sherwin. I'm an International Approvals Project Manager here at Vista Laboratories. Today we'll be going over Africa type approvals and market access for electrical and wireless telecommunications and radio products. Africa consists of over 50 countries or sovereign states, so we have a lot to go over today. We'll be going over the basic requirements and supplier responsibilities for these countries. Hopefully we'll get you started and get you a good insight on what is required to gain access to these countries. The good news is most of these countries have very similar requirements with minor differences, and for the most part, in-country testing is not required. So without further ado, let's begin. So this is what our agenda looks like for today. Again, it's over 50 countries. So this is a list of fully recognized sovereign states in Africa. All of these countries are members of the United Nations and the African Union. This does not include partially recognized states or dependent territories within Africa. So all of these countries, for the most part, they recognize CE and FCC. CE and FCC testing is required and normally a prerequisite for most of these countries, and the CE test reports and FCC test reports are accepted. So many countries require shipping samples, and in-country testing might be required, but testing in these cases is normally less stringent compared to countries where CE and FCC is not recognized. So in this case, most of them are recognized. It's recognized in most of these countries, so testing is very straightforward, mostly just verification testing. So again, FCC and CE is recognized in most of these countries. So starting with the first country in Africa, Algeria, ARPCE. This was originally ARPT, which renamed to ARPCE. This is the Regulatory Authority of Post and Electronic Communications in Algeria. So if you haven't done any testing yet, the first step would be to do the CE testing so you can compile your technical construction files and submit these documents to ARPCE and do the in-country testing, which is required. And one normal off-the-shelf sample is required. Lead time can be up to actually 16 weeks, which is the longest I've seen. Labeling CE FCC is accepted. And there's another agency, ANF, which regulates short-range device products. So ARPC is mainly the regulator for the cellular 2G, 3G LTE devices. Next up is Angola Inacom. This is the Angolan Institute of Communications. Again, CE FCC submission documents. In-country testing is not required. Local representatives required 4 to 8 week lead time, 1 year validity, and CE FCC labels are recognized. In Benin, RCEP is the Regulatory Communications Authority. They accept the CE and FCC technical documents. 1 normal sample is required for in-country testing, and a local representative is required, so a local authority within Benin. Lead time is 8 to 12 weeks, and the certificate validity is 5 years. Compliance with RCEP regulations is mandatory for wireless products. There is a special labeling requirement in Benin. Essentially, this is just the certification agreement number and a date. The Botswana Communications Regulatory Authority is the body in charge of telecom regulatory compliance in Botswana. Same submission documents, CE and FC submission is accepted. In-country testing is not required. Still, you must have a local representative in Botswana. 4 to 8 week lead time. Validity of the certificate will depend on the device. So previously, certificates were valid for 1 year. Then there were changes to make them permanent. Now it depends on the device, and the validity ranges from 1 to 5 years. There is a labeling requirement as well. So in Burkina Faso, ARCE is the regulatory authority for electronic communications and posts. Again, CE, FC submission documents are accepted. In-country testing is not required, and 4 to 8 week lead time with a validity of 5 years on the certificate. And labeling is not applicable. So CE, FCC is recognized, but there's no specific labeling requirement. ARCT is the Telecommunications Regulatory and Control Agency in Burundi. They accept CE and FCC submission documents for type approval, and one normal sample is required for in-country testing. There's not a requirement for a local representative within Burundi. Lead time is 8 to 12 weeks on average, and the validity of the certificate is 5 years, and there's no labeling requirement. So in Cameroon, this is the Telecommunications Regulatory Agency of Cameroon. Same submission documents. In-country testing is not required. 8 to 12 week lead time and 3-year validity on the certificate. Cape Verde is also known as Cabo Verde, and ANAC, this is the National Communications Authority of Cape Verde. Same documentation requirements. In-country testing is not required. Local representative is also not required. Lead time is 4 to 8 weeks. Validity is permanent on the certificate and no labeling requirement. So ANAC approvals are not actually required for importation, but this is the approval is generally requested by customers. So that's why compliance with this is normally required. Here are the requirements for the Telecommunications Regulatory Agency in the Central African Republic. In-country testing is not required. No local rep is required. 8 to 12 week lead time and 5-year validity on the certificate. So in the Republic of Chad, RCEP is the authority for regulating electronic communications and posts. CE, FCC submission files are recognized and accepted as submission documents for approval. Testing, one sample for in-country testing is required. Local representative is required. 4 to 8 week lead time on Chad type approval projects. 5-year validity on the certificate. Compliance is mandatory and labeling is not applicable. In Comoros, we have the National Authority for Regulation of Information and Communication Technologies. They accept the CE and FCC submission files. Testing is not required in country, and a local representative is still required. 4 to 8 week lead time, and the certificate is permanently valid, and there are no labeling requirements. So in Africa, there is both the Democratic Republic of Congo and Republic of Congo. So starting with the Democratic Republic of Congo, this is governed by ARPTC, which is the Post and Telecommunications Regulatory Authority. They accept the technical construction files and the FCC submission files as submission for approval. So testing, one normal sample is required, and in-country testing is required. So for large devices, such as floor standing equipment, in-country testing can be exempt. Local representative is required. Lead time 6 to 8 weeks, but actually we can expect delays for all of these countries. In fact, right now, type approval is on hold at the moment because there's a regulatory change. 6 to 8 week lead time normally, but again, right now it's actually on hold. So validity varies. So basically what the regulatory change is right now is that previously certificates were valid for 10 years, but now it will be valid for 2 years for radio modules and 3 years for larger equipment such as printers and computers. And for everything else, validity will be 5 years. So that's what's causing a hold on type approvals in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, at the moment. Compliance is mandatory and there's no applicable labeling requirements. So Republic of Congo is different than Democratic Republic of Congo. ARPCE is the regulatory agency of posts and electronic communications in the Republic of Congo. FCC submission documents are accepted. Testing is required. It used to be that it was not required, but it is now required in most cases. And for smartphones, computers, and tablet devices, and cellular devices, a sample is definitely required. If there's a size constraint on the sample in transporting, or any restriction in the size, if it's too big, then a waiver may be requested, so it can be exempt. 4 to 8 week lead time. Validity is permanent and there's no labeling requirements. So in the Ivory Coast, ARTCI is the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority of Côte d'Ivoire. So Ivory Coast is also known as Côte d'Ivoire. Um, FCC submission files are accepted. In-country testing may also be required. This is up to ARTCI to decide. So it'll be, if it's deemed necessary, then samples will be required for testing. Local representative is required, 48-week lead time, 5-year validity on the certificate. So in Djibouti, MCPT is the Ministry of Communication in charge of Posts and Telecommunications. FCC documents are accepted. No in-country testing and no local representative is required. 4 to 8 week lead time, and the certificate is valid for 5 years. So in Egypt, we have the National Telecom Regulatory Authority. CEFC's submission documents are accepted. Testing in country is not required, and no local rep is required. 6 to 8 week lead time. We can expect frequent delays for Egypt. The validity of the certificate is permanent, no labeling requirements. And if you didn't know, last year NTRA set out the regulations for wireless devices in the 5 gigahertz range. So this means that wireless LAN 802.11ac devices can now be approved and used in Egypt. There's still certain bands in the 5 gigahertz range that's not allowed for commercial use. But again, now 802.11ac devices can be approved and used in Egypt. In Equatorial Guinea, we have Ortel. They don't require in-country testing. They do require a local representative, and lead time is 4 to 8 weeks. On average, validity is a 3-year validity on the certificate, and there's no mandatory labeling requirements. In Eritrea, we have the Ministry of Transport and Communications, MTC. CEFC submission is accepted. Testing in country is not required. A local representative is required. 8 to 12 week lead time, and validity is permanent. Compliance is mandatory, and labeling is not applicable. So in terms of testing, there are exemptions for low power devices in Eritrea. So Eswatini, previously known as Swaziland, this is has been renamed, I think, starting last year, and SCCOM. So it used to be SCCOM for Swaziland Communications Commission. Now it's ESCCOM, which is the Eswatini Communications Commission. They do accept CEFC documents, no in-country testing, and no local representative is required. 4 to 8 weeks lead time, and the certificate is valid permanently. In terms of labeling, the logo of the commission on the right is required, and the type of the equipment and the model alphanumeric ID for the equipment is required. In Ethiopia, we have the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology. They accept FCCC submission documents. Testing in country is not required. There's no local representative requirement. 4 to 6 week lead time, and the validity of the certificate is 2 years, and there are no labeling requirements mandatory. RCEP is the regulatory authority for electronic communications and posts in Gabon. They accept CFC documents. In-country testing may be required. What this means is a sample may be requested for verification, although this is not generally the case. A local representative is not required. Lead time for projects in Gabon usually 6 to 8 weeks, and the validity of the certificate is 2 years. There's no mandatory labeling requirements in Gabon. So the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, PURA, is the telecoms regulatory authority of Gambia. They accept FCC, and additionally they will accept any test reports based on at sea standards, ITU, IEC, or ISO. So they do accept more different reports recognized by different authorities all over the world. So testing, in-country testing may also be required. So if they have any concerns about the product in terms of its interference, EMC, EMI, or health and safety of the product, then they will request the sample. Local representative is required, 4 to 8 week lead time, 2-year validity on the certificate, and in terms of labeling, they do accept CEFCC labels. So the National Communications Authority of Ghana, CEFCC documents are accepted, in-country testing is required, and samples are required, except for radio modules. So if this is a radio module by itself, then it's exempt from in-country testing. If it's a host device that incorporates a radio module or an end product, then it will require in-country testing. Additionally, samples are required for devices that are cellular or smartphones, computers, and tablets. Local representative is a required lead time 8 to 12 weeks, permanent certificate validity, and there's a labeling requirement specific to NCA. NCA approved with this certificate number, and e-labeling is allowed in Ghana. So the Regulatory Authority of Post and Telecommunications of Guinea. In-country testing is required. One normal sample. Local rep is required. A lead time 6 to 8 weeks and a 5-year validity on the certificate. In Guinea-Bissau, we have ARN, which is the National Regulatory Authority for Information and Communications Technologies. So CE/FCC documents are accepted. In-country testing is not required. Local rep is required. Lead time 4 to 8 weeks. There's frequent delays as well. I think at one point they had a 4-month suspension and holding of all type of approval activity. We can expect frequent delays on the issuance of the certificate. Local representatives required. Lead time 4 to 8 weeks. Validity is 5 years. So that's new, starting from last year. Previously, I believe it was permanent. So compliance is mandatory, and CE logo and FCC IDs are accepted as labeling. So CA is the Communications Authority of Kenya. They accept CE/FCC submission documents, and in-country testing is required as well on top of that. One normal sample, and this is only for smartphones, tablet devices, computers, cellular devices. Local representative is required, and the lead time is 4 to 8 weeks. So the validity is a provisional certificate for 6 months, and then from then on renewed every year. Compliance with CA requirements is mandatory, and FCC CE labeling requirements are accepted. Additionally, low power short range devices can be exempt if they comply with the maximum output power limits and they're operating in the permitted frequency band. So this is new. So if it's a low power short range device, then there is a chance that it can be freely imported and sold in Kenya and exempt from all of these requirements. So here are the requirements for Lesotho Communications Authority. In-country testing is not required and no local representative is required. 4 to 8 week lead time, and the certificate is permanently valid. We have the Liberian Telecommunications Authority in Liberia. In-country testing is not required, just the CE/FCC submission documents work. Local representative is required, 8 to 12 week lead time, and the certificate is permanently valid. In Libya, we have the General Authority of Communications and Informatics. CE/FCC submission documents are accepted, no in-country testing requirements. A local representative is required, 4 to 8 weeks lead time, and a 5-year validity on the certificate. So in Madagascar, we have the Regulatory Authority for Communications Technology, and this is a really new regulatory authority. I think they started in 2015, 2014. So same documentation for submission. Testing in country is not required. No samples, but what we need to provide the serial number for the devices that will be imported. A local representative is required, 2 to 4 week lead time, and the certificate is permanently valid, and they accept and recognize CE/FCC labeling. In Malawi, MACRA is the Malawi Communications Regulatory Authority. They accept CE/FCC documents, no in-country testing. A local representative is required, and the lead time is 4 to 8 weeks, and the certificate is permanently valid. In Mali, we have AMRTP, which is the Malian Regulatory Authority for Telecommunications, ICT, and Posts. They accept CE/FCC documents for submission, and one sample is required for in-country testing. Local rep is required. The lead time is 4 to 8 weeks, and the certificate is valid permanently. And the AR is the Regulatory Authority of Mauritania. They accept CE/FCC submission documents. No in-country testing. Local rep is required. 2 to 4 week lead time and 5-year validity on the certificate. And they accept CE/FCC labeling. So in Mauritius, we have ICTA, which is the Information and Communications Technologies Authority. They accept CEFC submission documents. No in-country testing is required, and in fact, if it's a Bluetooth or Wi-Fi only device, then it's exempt, and you're not required to obtain any type of approval for that. Local representative is not required. Lead time 4 to 8 weeks. Validity is 5 years, and there's no labeling requirements in Meridius. In Morocco, we have ANRT, which is the Communications Regulatory Authority. FCC submission documents are accepted. In-country testing is not required, and there's a local representative required. 2 to 4 week lead time, and the certificate is valid for 10 years. There is a labeling requirement, as shown here, and additionally, there is a new C mark which is required for certain devices used within certain voltage limits, and other products such as toys. So in Mozambique, we have the Communications Regulatory Authority of the Republic of Mozambique. Previously, this was INCM, which is the National Communications Institute of Mozambique. Now it's renamed to ARECOM. This change doesn't affect any type approvals or anything like that. It's just that in the future, certificates are now issued by ARECOM. And if you still have a previously issued cert by INCM, it's still valid. So they do accept CEFC submission documents for new type approvals. In-country testing is not required, and a local rep is required. 4 to 6 week lead time, and the validity of certificates is 8 years. In Namibia, we have the Communications Regulatory Authority of Namibia, CRAN. They accept CEFCC documents, and local in-country testing is not required. Local representative is also not required. Lead time 4 to 8 weeks, and the certificate is valid for 3 years. And there's no labeling requirements. Recently, I know they just posted a exemption list, so I believe it includes laptops, desktop computers, computer peripherals, wireless charging devices, wireless peripherals like that. So these are now exempt from Namibia type approval. So in Niger, we have RCEP. Again, they accept CEFCC submission documents. Testing, one in-country testing sample is required, and these samples are required for cellular devices, smartphones, 2G, 3G, 4G, personal computers, tablets, and etc. Local representative is required. Lead time 4 to 8 weeks, and the validity of the certificate is 10 years. In terms of labeling, we need the approval date number and model identification, serial number, lot number, and the manufacturer supplier's name on the product. And moving on to Nigeria, the Nigeria Communications Commission, they accept CEFCC submission documents. They require one normal sample for testing for smartphones, tablets, computers, cellular devices, IoT devices. Local representative is not required. Lead time is 4 to 8 weeks for the project completion, and 5-year validity on the certificate. There is a labeling requirement where you need a staged connection and use of this communications equipment is permitted by NCC on the device. So in Rwanda, the Rwanda Utilities Regulatory Authority, RURA, is the regulatory body for telecom radio devices. So they accept CEFCC submission documents, and they require one sample for in-country testing. So I think just recently they resumed the type approval. I think previously it was stopped for a long time, so we can expect delays again, 4 to 6 week lead time. So I think they added another requirement. So the sample requirement is new, and also a certificate from a notified body or is required for the approval. So not just the declaration of conformity, but a actual certificate such as an FCC grant or type examination certificate is now required. Validity is permanent, and the compliance mandatory labeling is not applicable. So in Sao Tome and Principe, the AGER is the General Regulatory Authority. In-country testing is not required. Local representative is required. They accept CEFCC documents. Lead time is up to 12 weeks, and the validity of the certificate is permanent. For type approval in Senegal, we have ARTP, which is the Regulatory Authority for Telecommunications and Posts. They accept CEFCC submission documents. In-country testing is not required, and a local representative is required. Up to 8 weeks for the project completion, and the certificates are permanently valid. DICT is the Department of Information and Communications Technology of Seychelles. CE FCC submission documents are accepted. Testing is not required in country. Local rep is required for 8 weeks lead time, and the certificates are valid permanently. In Sierra Leone, we have NATCOM, which is the National Telecommunications Commission. They accept CE FCC documents. Testing is not required in country. Local representative is required. Lead time normally 4 to 8 weeks, but right now actually they're appointing a new president of NATCOM. So all projects are on hold right now. So we can expect delays. Validity is permanent, and labeling is not applicable. So NCA is the National Communications Authority of Somalia. They accept CE documents or FCC documents. Testing in country is not required. Local representative is not required. Lead time 4 to 8 weeks. Validity is 3 years for the certificate. So right now, equipment, there's a specific list of equipment that require type approval in Somalia. We have terminal equipment such as tablets, PDAs, telephone sets, and short-range devices also require type approval. So Wi-Fi, Bluetooth devices, NFC readers, RFID devices, radio transceivers such as satellite, base station, broadcast equipment, and also network equipment. So routers, modems, switches, servers, things like that do require mandatory type approval in Somalia. So ICASA is the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa. They require 1 normal sample for in-country testing and a local representative, 4 to 8 week lead time, and certificates are valid permanently. And there's a special labeling requirement for ICASA. You need to have the logo and the type approval number. In South Sudan, we have the NCA, the National Communications Authority. 1 normal sample is required for in-country testing. They do accept CE FCC documents. Local representative is required, up to 4 week lead time, and the certificates are valid permanently. So Tanzania TCRA Communications Regulatory Authority, they accept CFC submission documents. 1 normal in-country testing sample is required. Local representative is not required, 4 to 8 weeks lead time, and the validity of the certificate is permanent. There's a special labeling requirement, but also CE FCC labels can take the place of that, and they're also recognized and accepted. ARTNP is the regulatory authority for post and telecommunications sectors in Togo. They require CE or FCC submission documents and 1 normal sample for in-country testing. It usually takes 8 to 12 weeks for the project completion, and the certificates are valid for 3 years. There are no mandatory labeling requirements in Togo. In Tunisia, we have ANF. They accept CE FCC documents. In terms of testing, we will need 2 samples, 1 normal off-the-shelf sample and 1 conducted RF sample, meaning the antenna port is connected to an external SMA or some connector for radio frequency measurements. Local representative is required. Lead time is 8 to 12 weeks, and the certificates are valid for 3 years. In Uganda, we have the Uganda Communications Commission, UCC. They accept CE FCC submissions and technical files. No in-country testing is required. In-country local representative is required. 4 to 8 week lead time, and certificates are valid permanently. And in terms of labeling, they will require CE or FCC labels to be shown. ZICTA is the Zambia Information and Communications Technology Authority. They accept CE technical files and FCC submission files. Testing in country is not required. A local representative is required. Lead time is 6 to 8 weeks, and certificates are permanently valid. There is a special labeling requirement. You must show the ZICTA word and the logo, as well as the type approval certificate number. In Zimbabwe, we have POTRAZ, the Postal and Telecommunications Regulatory Authority of Zimbabwe. They accept CE FCC submission documents, and there's no in-country testing requirements. A local representative is required, and lead time is 6 to 8 weeks. Certificates are permanently valid, and there's no labeling requirements. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. I do appreciate your time. So this was a very quick rundown of over 50 countries in Africa. Keep in mind, there are other requirements that can apply, such as safety. So it can be product dependent. So depending on what product and the electrical characteristics, you might have other requirements that apply in these countries. Some countries are embargoed per United States export control regulations, so you might want to keep that in mind as well if you are a U.S. manufacturer. Vista Labs is a 17025 accredited test lab, so we can do the CE testing, the FC testing, and we can compile the technical construction files and these documents for you for submission to these countries. We're also a certification body, so we do certifications for countries all over the globe, as well as international approvals, such as countries in Africa. So these are countries that we specialize in and we serve and we understand pretty well. So if you have any questions, comments, please send us an email at info@vista-compliance.com, and we'll definitely get back to you and help provide a solution for you for your products and figure out what works best for you. So thank you for your time. I hope you learned something in this quick and dirty rundown of all these African countries. And again, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at info@vista-compliance.com. Thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye.